you hire these consultants and they basically do calculations based on it's like called the window to wall ratio of how much solid opaque wall there is to window and what orientation those walls are. Basically, you have to have a certain score for your energy model in order to meet the building code requirements. If the municipality is dictating that they need air conditioning, number one, the new building code that came out in 2024 has a requirement for at least one habitable room in the house to be below a certain degree in the summer. And obviously that's to combat, the issues that we have every summer on a heat wave. Some seniors get into peril and have some issues.
Everyone's got a real estate story. Some are wins and some are total nightmares. We are here to give you the keys to what's really going on in Vancouver real estate, from what it actually takes to become a real estate agent to what it really costs to build a home, and all the stories in between. This is the real estate of things, where nothing is off the table and everything is negotiable.
My guest today is a friend and also neighbor here in our neighborhood of Pembroke Heights. He is a multifamily, primarily architect, and would like to welcome to the show Ben Fisher of Polyform Architecture.
Hello.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Just diving right in. First thing we always like to talk about is how'd you get your start and what drew you to architecture? What it takes to become an architect, and then we can get into all the nitty gritty after that.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, growing up, I didn't have any grand vision of becoming an architect or anything. I didn't, sit in class when I was young and think about buildings. But I got into it kind of raw from the ground up. My parents, when I was about 18, decided to design and build a house.
Okay.
And it took about a year and a half in the design. And then I was kind of in the summers between university at the time they started construction.
Yeah.
And I got a job with the builder.
Okay.
Never been on a job site before, never really picked up a hammer. I wasn't too handy growing up. And I show up on the job site first day, didn't have the right boots, didn't have the right anything. But, as you probably learn the best by being thrown in the deep end and just like picking it up as you go.
Yeah.
So my introduction to building was on the job site. I spent on and off about 18 months working for that contractor. It was after my first sort of undergrad degree, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was a bit lost. Working on the job site in the middle of the winter in the rain, stripping forms, you get a reality check pretty quick as to not the distant and the near future if you don't sort of make some decisions. But I wanted to be more on the decision-making side of it rather than physically building it myself.
Right.
So I looked at different programs. I looked at BCIT, had a program. I looked at UBC, and I ultimately chose BCIT to go in, and they have an architectural science degree program there.
Okay.
Super intensive. I spent 4 years sort of like getting into the fundamentals of what it means to build and design and the technicalities of what goes into a building.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome experience. If anyone's thinking about getting into architecture, I highly recommend looking at that program. When that was done, I was a bit burnt out. Spent 3 years working in the industry for a really great, well-known designer, Howard Airy. I worked for him for almost 3 years, doing really high-end custom homes and sort of boutique developments. We did some multifamily as well. And I realized, it was a great experience. Howard and I are still friends. I consider him a bit of a mentor myself, but I decided, to go back to school to get my master's degree. And it kind of leads into the other part of the question is like, what does it take to become an architect?
Mm-hmm.
You have to have a master's degree, which is considered the professional degree. You can get that, at most universities in Canada, major universities in Canada. Depending on what your background is, you either spend 3 years or 4 years, depending on the school, studying architecture. And the master's degree is all-encompassing as well, but it's more design and theory focused.
Mm-hmm.
How to think like an architect, how to think like a designer, how to think critically, push the boundaries, ask questions. So I went to UBC, spent 3 years there doing my master's degree, tried to forget all the technical stuff I learned in the industry and in my undergrad, to try and like push my critical thinking and my design abilities. And you get thrown back out of the industry when you're done that. And then what you do to become an architect is you have to spend, they call it the intern architect program.
So you got to go work for an architecture firm that's existing to kind of job shadow. And
exactly.
Sort of thing, right?
So you have to work for someone who's registered.
Okay.
They have to oversee you. And what you also have is an industry mentor who's a registered architect working outside of the firm you're at.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a second opinion to make sure you're getting the right hours, to make sure your hours are fitting under the mandated different types of work hours you need at different phases of the project. And they basically sign off on your hours. You meet with them once a quarter. You talk shop. You have coffee. You go for a beer, whatever you do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a way to sort of get more insight than just sort of the single practice focus of where you're working. And it was great. I had a great mentor, Scott Keck. He's working over in the Sunshine Coast now. And we met. We made kind of a social thing out of it. We chatted. It was fun. It was good. I had a good relationship with Harold, the president of Creo, and we had been chatting, and he had approached me about kind of joining the development side and being part of the Creo team as a development manager. So I wanted to dive into it, just to get another aspect of the industry, work from the owner's perspective, and develop my career that way. So I spent 5 years as a development manager working at Creo, building townhomes in Moodyville.
And did you like that? Because I would think that, well, how do I say this? Like architects, in my eyes, you're also kind of an artist. You're inspired. You're wanting to build something. You're wanting to put your, for lack of a better example, your stamp on it. You're passionate. You want to envision things and all those kinds of things. So was that a little bit like you had these kind of handcuffs, or you were living kind of a double life where you're also doing development stuff and kind of doing that side of it? Or did you still have some freedom that you could, be involved with that design process? Or were you, wearing steel toe boots and making sure things were going according to plan in Moodyville?
Yeah, a bit of both, actually. Like it was for the first, I'd say 6 months, it was a bit of a difficult transition. I had to get my headspace. I had to alter my perception or my focus on my day-to-day. It was less about executing the building and more about executing the project.
Okay.
So like, when you're the owner and you're the developer, you have, behind the scenes, the breadth of information you have to coordinate and keep your tabs on is far more than just the building. The building is what's ultimately built, but it's only a portion of what you have to keep your focus on.
Right. So you were with Creo doing the Moodyville, like a lot of the product that's in there that I know from, kind of my work in there. It's predominantly walk-up townhomes, row homes, things like that. So you were with Creo for, you said 5
years in total, and we still have a good relationship. I still kind of consult with them all the time, and we're actually we're friends, and I consider us pretty close.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then moving from Creo, this is when the inception of Polyform started. So what made you want to make that next transition to have your own, shop or your own firm and do that side of it?
I always had it in the back of my mind, like, when you hear a name, you're like, oh, that would be a really cool company name. Like I always had this in the back of my mind about this practice that I'd like to have for myself. You have obviously self-doubt over the years. You have, you think you're not experienced enough. Life goes by and you get to a point, at least for me, I got to a point and I was like, I want to make some moves. I had me and my wife had a couple kids, and, I felt like in my experience, having children is kind of like a second rebirth for you.
For sure. Yeah.
For me, it kickstarted my motivation, and it kickstarted the perception of time moving very quickly. You see these kids growing in front of you. They're different every month, sometimes every week. When they're really young, every day. It's like, it's wild. And it kind of like, it pushed me to make decisions and just to go for it.
Yeah.
And,
I find that, with, like I was in a few different careers before I was in real estate. And my last career before being in real estate, I was traveling salesman. I traveled Vancouver Island to Winnipeg, and I sold like industrial fire protection equipment. And I grew up in the fire protection business because my dad was a fire sprinkler contractor. When our kids were young, similar but different, I was on the road a week, maybe 2 weeks a month, and being controlled, I guess, by, working for someone in a lot of ways didn't work. It didn't jive with my lifestyle. And like what I say about my work now is that, I don't work 80 hours a week or anything like that. But I'm kind of always working and always doing things. And I've had the joy of having our kids kind of grow up in real estate with us because, I do work the weekends and things like that, or showings in the evenings and all these kinds of things. But it has afforded me a lifestyle where I control my own schedule, my own success with it and things like that too. And I think that's kind of, maybe I'm putting the words in your mouth, but that's similar to what you're talking about from leaving your latest job with Creo into starting Polyform, is that, you want to be a self-motivator, you want to create something, you want to take strides and things like that, but you also want to control more of probably your day-to-day schedule.
For sure. I mean, there is some aspect of my profession where you have to deliver, right? You have to like sit down and actually grind it out and do the work.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have anyone working for me right now. Or collaborating with me on projects. So, the buck stops with me.
For sure.
So in order to, hit my deadlines, I do have to sometimes work long hours, which is kind of part of it, but it comes and goes in waves. But it's, overall, it'll be 2 years in March that I launched my own business. And it's been great to build my own relationships with my clients. It's been great to foster existing relationships with people I have in the industry and be able to, deliver my designs that I've come up with.
Going from Creo and now Polyform, there's obviously lots of different architect jobs. Let's say your primary focus is really in the area of multifamily development.
It's in residential. So my main focus is multifamily. But I do take on single family homes and renovations at the same time.
Okay.
There are very different projects and very different clients.
Yeah, I can imagine, because the residential multifamily, what kind of goes on there in terms of your involvement, which is large, with the design phase, with seeing the build process through phase. You have a blank piece of land in, let's call it Moodyville, and it's 500 feet by 500 feet. Where do you start, and what's your process? Because so much has to go into that. And we talked with Tony Cleal from Northland Living, and I asked him the same question: how do you decide how many 1-bedroom condos there are in a high rise, or how many penthouse units, and all these kinds of things? You're obviously getting information based on previous projects, yours or not. But what is the process when you go pen to paper and say, this is what it's going to look like? We're going to have 18 row homes, or we're going to have 80 condo units, that kind of thing. Like where do you start and stuff?
Yeah, it's a pretty complex process that we try to simplify and try to communicate clearly to our clients. Like typically,
talk to me like I'm a realtor.
Talk to me. Well, the product out there is. We get approached usually with a brief, which is like a summary of kind of the scope of unit types or sizes that they're targeting. Mm-hmm. So a developer will do their own market research, or they'll come to us and we'll kind of do a feasibility study as to what could be a possibility on that site. Given the market conditions and myself being on the development side, I was obviously privy to a little bit more of the marketing and the sales side of it than a typical architect would be exposed to. And that's not a fault of any architect. It's just kind of how the industry is set up. Developers and real estate marketing firms or agents like yourself, like you have your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the market for the given typology of housing that you're looking to develop. the developer will come with a unit mix. We would do a feasibility study. Right now with all the AI tools that have come out for feasibility studies, you can get answers back quite quickly, whereas traditionally it may take a number of weeks. Now it can be done in, honestly, like hours or days. Like it's advancing quite a lot. But we have to take into account, the topography of the site. If in Moodyville, for instance, there's lots of sites that are very steeply sloping from one end to the other. That's a really big impact on how the building touches the ground. There's zoning parameters, building code requirements, and unfortunately, every municipality has different zoning bylaws. So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution for all different municipalities. You have to go through and sift through the zoning information to understand, what the constraints are.
Yeah, absolutely. And with styles and things like that, like, would you say that you have your own style, whether it's kind of West Coast modern or minimalist or, craftsman style? What is your style? And then also, what are you seeing as being kind of the hot ticket or the hot item, especially with, like you say, multifamily, or because a lot of your work with Creo was obviously multifamily, but it was townhomes, row homes, things like that are kind of, you have a front door on a street kind of thing, right? So what are you seeing that's been successful?
That's the, I think what people like to have is a place that they can walk up to at their front door. Like my preferences as an individual stem from, like you said, I think like West Coast. West Coast modernism. I'm a big fan of the mid-century modern movement and the case study houses that happened in the mid 20th century. That was a big influence on me when I was at UBC. I did a paper on it. I studied those a lot. I just found them intriguing, the mix of, new design concepts. Yeah. Mixed with, industrial revolution style material changes that influenced how the architecture was expressed. So it's, for me, that those things make me feel good. I like mid-century modern. I like open indoor-outdoor living. We have a luxury here on the West Coast where it doesn't get too cold, where we can kind of have that lifestyle most of the year. But in terms of my practice and what style I like to sort of deploy in my practice, it's really project specific. It's client specific. My process and workflow is very collaborative. I want to work with the clients together and come up with something. Like if I'm doing a single family home, for instance, like I'm not going to be the end user of that project. Why should I push my own agenda on it? They're going to be the people living there. They're going to be the ones experiencing every day. And ultimately, it's their asset. So what can I do to best facilitate experiential maximization and adding the most value to them? When it's multifamily, like I said before, the developer client and the homeowner client, they're very different personalities and individuals. And the developer client is more pragmatic. They want to, it's a business venture. They want to make profit for the business. And the development business is a tough business. Yeah. There's lots of uncertainty. There's lots of risk. There's lots of unknowns when you commit to a project.
Yeah, and that's something, like I said, we when we were talking with Tony a while back, Tony Khalil, it's very risk reward. And I think that in a lot of cases, there's a stigma there that, the developers make money hand over fist, and they're all riding around on private planes and having $10,000 dinners and stuff like that, which in some cases is true. But you also don't hear about as many of the horror stories that they go through and projects.
Unlimited liability.
Unlimited liability. I remember because I did mention here when you first came on, you live just around the corner from us, a block away. And I remember before you guys moved there, that house being for sale. And I remember going through it and I was like, shit, this house is cool. And correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was it was done by an architect who used to work for Arthur Erickson. Is that correct?
That's what I heard. So the neighbors who were living next to me, they don't live there anymore, but they lived there when we first moved in. They had lived in that house since 1952.
Since 52, okay.
So they were living on that street when 22nd was a dirt road.
Yeah.
Like 23rd was a dirt road. It was like a long time ago. So they knew everyone who sort of came and went, and they knew the people who had built the original house, and they also knew the people who had done the renovation in the 70s. And the architect, I don't know, I never found out the architect's name, but they told me that the architect would, at the time he designed the house, he was working in Arthur Erickson's office, and it's got a lot of like Erickson type of little features to it.
Yeah, I know his stuff. Like, I'm not, a huge passionate architectural guy, but I do love, like you said, the West Coast modern homes and things like that. When we sell, a development build lot to a family, and it's not always the case. Someone might want just a craftsman home or whatever. But if they say we want to build a West Coast modern home, usually there's a certain level of cringe factor, not in terms of that would be super cool. Where my head goes, just knowing, the industry and the build side and what things cost. Why does mid-century cost so much to build? And why does it cost so much like more nowadays? Because we saw those homes a lot in the what era, like the 50s?
Yeah, it was between like 1955 and 1980, I want to say.
Yeah. So why does it cost so much, say, present day to replicate a home that looks similar to yours, or like some of these ones that we see deep in West Vancouver, Caulfield, things like that? What's the reasoning for that?
I would say they just kind of defy the convention of construction. West Coast modernism, kind of wants to expand on the typical sizes. You want to have, expansive glazed walls that have views out to the garden. You want to have exposed wood beams, for instance, that run inside outside. Whereas, conventional construction would have sort of hidden structural elements covered in drywall and painted. West Coast modernism wants to sort of express those materials as the finished material and finish them in a nice way. So, and when you have expansive walls of glazing, the cost per square foot of a piece of glass and a window curtain wall, or if it's wood windows or whatever you choose, the cost per square foot of a glazed wall is more expensive than a conventional wall.
But those are the projects, if and when you get those opportunities, those are the projects that have to be the most exciting and rewarding when they come together, would they not be? To have, as an architect, I think to have a lot of freedom.
Honestly, they're both rewarding. Both typologies are rewarding, but in a little bit different way. And when I talk about design freedom, when you ask about design freedom and houses and clients that come to you and say, we really love this style, we don't necessarily know exactly what we want, we're looking for some guidance and some input from, yourself as a professional, propose something to us. And to me, when I hear that, it's not necessarily full on freedom, because you still have to work with the realities of, the cost of construction, the realities of a building standing up under the laws of physics. Like, those type of things are present regardless of what design freedom you have. So like, I like to think about it as like sort of responsible design freedom, because you have to think about their best interests and what's going to add the most value based on the problems that your clients have come to you with, and how do you solve those problems.
This might be a two-part question, but going from residential multifamily to single family residential, you obviously go through a ton of development projects of multi, and then you obviously go through a ton of residential homes, things like that, whether they're new and you're just happen to go through an open house or during the construction phase, things like that. What, in terms of what you see on a project that you're say not involved with, or on a residential home that you didn't design and things like that, what would you say is probably the most common error you see with projects? Is it scale? Is it layout? Is it number of bathrooms?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start off by saying, it's one thing for an architect or anyone to walk into a house and be able to criticize what's there. without knowing the backstory.
Okay. Yeah.
Like-
That's fair.
Like maybe not even criticize, but like comment on how they could have done things better. I think in terms of like as an overall theme in our industry, I think the biggest mistakes that homeowners make is not having a design that's fully thought through before you start construction.
Right.
Whether that's hiring an interior designer. Yeah, I work with many interior designers in the industry here, and the most successful projects are when there's a really cohesive balance between contractor, interior designer, architect, and client.
Yeah.
And
Brian Rand said the same thing, and so did Erica Winterfield.
Yeah, and you're working
right?
together. You know, it's a little bit more of an upfront cost for the homeowner, but it really comes down ultimately to what the clients value in the end.
Are you seeing that, again, with multifamily or whether it's with the residential, more so multifamily, but are you seeing any features that are really that golden carrot being dangled that people are really gravitating towards in terms of, you know, everyone wants a, you know, like back in the day it was like, oh, we have a bidet. And now you're like, what's bidet? Yeah. But are you seeing anything in the multifamily that, that working with the marketing and things like that and demographics that buyers are really expecting to see in, say, a $1.4 million townhouse?
Yeah, definitely.
In Louisville, things like that.
Yeah, I think the integrated millwork and cabinetry is a big thing.
Yeah.
That's something that's sort of become standard.
Well, for so long, it was just the, what do you call it, melamine stuff and just cheap. And once some developers took that next step up, it just elevated their product in comparison to others, right?
Totally. And I think when you're marketing, especially on the pre-sale side, if you're doing pre-sale marketing for multifamily, you're trying to market the things that people interact with and touch, and the things that add value based on the cultural understanding of what that value is for those homes. So if it's, you know, here it's big on kitchens, bathrooms, storage. Those are big things. And then on the next tier would probably be, well, parking is, you know, there's a big saying in architecture that form follows parking.
Okay.
Basically, parking dictates how a project's going to look and feel. And for some projects, it does. That's besides the point. Anyways, back to the question. Kitchens, bathrooms, storage, and I think on the next level would be, you know, where's the natural light? I think that's a big one. People like to have windows.
Yeah.
Get a feel for the outside.
Now, speaking of that, you know, light exposure, things like that. I've heard that, you know, different municipalities, different cities, things like that. There's some pretty stringent guidelines in terms of window, you know, glazing windows, and where you can put the windows, how many windows you can have, the size of the windows. And then we actually had a client build their home about 3-4 years ago, and they were, I think, dictated then by the municipality that they had to have air conditioning in the house based on the number of windows, i.e. glazing, that they had proposed in their architectural design. And is that something that you've seen as well, where it's now mandated to have AC based on the amount of windows? So
well, it's not necessary. Well, it all depends now. Like when you're talking about expansive windows and needing AC, that's all about heat gain versus like heat gain through through sun and how much would naturally dissipate out of the house. So when the energy coming into your house is higher than the energy dissipating, your house is going to increase in heat. Now, most municipalities, when you're building a new house, you have to submit what's called an energy modeling report.
Is that the EnerGuide, or is that
EnerGuide is like a standard that the energy modeler follows. Depending, there's different standards, but the energy model you hire these consultants, and they basically do calculations based on it's like called the window to wall ratio of how much solid opaque wall there is to window and what orientation those walls are. And basically you have to have a certain score for your energy model in order to meet the building code requirements. So if the municipality is dictating that they need air conditioning, you know, number one, the new building code that came out in 2024 has a requirement for at least one habitable room in the house to be below a certain degree in the summer.
Okay.
So they're kind of mandating that you have to have at least one room with air conditioning. And obviously that's to combat, you know, the the issues that we have every summer on a heat wave. Some seniors get into peril and have some issues.
Yeah.
Or people just who have health concerns. Doesn't necessarily have to be a senior, but.
Are you on more the multifamily side? There's certain green initiatives, right? We had LEED for a while. There's passive homes. There's all these different terms. Are you seeing that we're going to see a greater influence from local municipality on those things and continue to see on those things? Have they pulled back a bit? And then also, do homeowners give a shit when it comes down to it, really?
Yeah. So it started off, there was, LEED was something that was there before it was mandated in the building code. And LEED was always very prescriptive and not necessarily inherent to the design of a building. It was kind of like these application things you could add to it or to get certain points. Now with the BC government has implemented the British Columbia Step Code that's deals with different parameters of construction and how you actually build the envelope and systems of the building rather than just applying these things on the outside. So now with the Step Code, for instance, in Moodyville, if you're building a townhouse project, you have to meet either, I can't remember, it's Step Code 3 or Step Code 4. The maximum is Step Code 5, which is very, very close to passive house designation, which people who aren't aware of that, it's kind of like it's a rating system that's applied to buildings that meet certain, air tightness requirements, certain thermal or insulation requirements, certain window performance requirements, and certain mechanical system requirements. They're all sort of inherent to the passive house designation.
Pushing back a little bit to kind of the hot topic, that being densification that we're seeing. And, it's something we get asked, I would say, a decent amount, especially in terms of if a client's looking to buy a piece of property and thinks, I can put this amount of units on it, things like that. What is, in kind of an elevator pitch or in layman's terms, what has it been and where are most of the municipalities going towards in terms of the density kind of thing?
Yeah. I mean, especially in BC, I think with the mandate coming down from the provincial government, we're seeing the municipalities pushing for more, they call it gentle density. So 3, 4, 6 dwelling units on what was previously a single family home.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the neighborhood and depending on the size of the lot, it can either be very imposing on the neighborhood or it can be actual gently densified.
Yeah.
There's a big difference. And I think where architects can come in and really add value, not only to the neighborhood level and the urban design level, but also sort of presenting really responsible and really valuable designs that could be, a multiplex project in a neighborhood that's traditionally known as single family. But I think there's always a dichotomy between, the developer mindset and the architect mindset. Architect always wants to do what's best for design and construction and, seeing the vision come to life, and developer always has the bottom line in play.
So you see it, I mean, as long as it kind of goes back to the original thing, even you're building a single family home and involving the interior designer, the builder, the architect all in the same room. It's similar to what you're saying on the multifamily stuff, is that if they put the right minds together, if they find what works, what doesn't work, and comes up with a process that and guidelines that people are required, or a mandate rather, that people are required to follow, hopefully it's not as big of an issue as some people may think. Because
exactly. And the development permit process, you always got to look at what the permit is for the site too. If it's just straight up building permit, that means that they've obliged by all the zoning parameters and they're not asking for any relaxations.
Yeah. If
you're going through the development permit process, that means either that type of building, whether it's, a fourplex or whatever the type is, that means that that type of building has to go through a development permit route in order to get approval.
Got it.
So what the development permit does is that it allows, it's when you see the big signs up on a site, it says this person is applying for development. There's a certain window of neighborhood notification that happens where all the neighbors in the vicinity get letters from the city or from the developer. And they're allowed to review all the plans online. Everything's public. Then they have a certain window of time where they can make comments. They can phone in, they can write an email, they can go into City Hall. They can do different avenues. And the intention of that is to get the feedback of the public for the people that are immediately affected by that development. And if there are relaxations that are being requested by that project, the public feedback can actually have a pretty big impact on how the final project is executed. And I'm coming at this from like a developer and an architect perspective, where it can be a real challenge working with neighbors when you're trying to get a project passed for your client. But as a citizen and as somebody who believes in, free speech and the ability to sort of, impact your future through your action, I encourage everybody to get out there, voice your opinion when the signs go up, if they do go up in lots that are close to you, and voice your concerns. And if your concerns are reasonable and they go against what's been approved by the development guidelines or the developer requirements, then they will get heard. I've been on projects where one neighbor showed up to every single. These ones were like public hearings because it was a rezoning project. But they showed up to every single council meeting. They showed up to every single public hearing. They wrote letters to the city, and we had to change the design because of those neighbors.
Yeah.
So it does happen.
But speaking of architecture, you design, and speaking more of the single family home, what's the biggest item that you get pushback? You put a proposed design in with your clients, and what are they saying no to? What do you argue on?
The submission might be incomplete. So usually municipalities have a full checklist of what you have to submit, and you go through, and there's some application forms and these forms and a certain list of drawings with certain requirements. I've been in situations, as you're going through, everything's a learning, not necessarily a setback, but a learning. And I've taken those learnings in the past of, having some applications that have been incomplete, and understanding that, when the municipality and the plan checker is looking through the drawings, they want to, if they go through their checklist and they say everything's good, you're going to have much less pushback and much more credibility in their eyes that they trust that this is a complete package.
Yeah.
When the things that are really there and they've specifically outlined it for you are met. And that tends to give you a little bit more, I want to say clout with them and a reputation. As being someone who's applying for a permit and is going to have all the information to make their lives easier.
Yeah, it's the same about having a general contractor that has a good rapport with that municipality as well, right? Where they know when they pull a gas permit or a plumbing permit or a framing permit that, hey, we're going to obviously check the work, but we know it's done right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? But I would think that another pushback from different municipalities would be if you're really trying to do something wild design wise, right?
Yeah, definitely.
That's going to raise red flags to them, and they're going to have pushback because they want more uniform product, more specifically on the residential single family homes and things like that. But
remember, they're not there to kill your project.
Right.
They're there to enforce the agreed upon guidelines and bylaws that everyone has to follow.
Yeah.
Like that's their role. Their role is to just be keep everyone in check. Unfortunately, people get frustrated with the people that work at the municipalities, but they want to see success of the project just like we all do.
Yeah.
But they have a different lens that they're looking at it through.
In terms of whether it's multifamily residential or single family residential, what advice would you give to, let's say a developer or a couple that is looking to build their next home in Grand Boulevard or west side of Vancouver, when interviewing potential architects for their project?
Ultimately, it comes down to workflow and communication and whether you get along with that person.
Okay. Yeah.
Through the design phases, especially when you're doing a custom home for a client, you really need to understand them on a level of their day-to-day rituals. And to get there, you have to ask a lot of questions and you have to divulge information. As the homeowner, divulge information to your architect. So as a client, you really want to connect with that person either on a personal level, or if you connect with them on a design aspect of how they've executed projects in the past. I would, number one, interview. If you have architects you're looking at, I would interview them. Find out how they communicate. Find out how they solve problems. I had one client ask me, like, when it came to design style, similar to kind of like how you asked, like, what's your preferred style, and how would you react if our design style is different than yours, which is could be a sense of conflict if there's egos involved or if there's agendas on both sides involved. Like, it could be conflicting. So ask those types of questions to try and get out of them how they work, what their personality is like, what their working style is like, what their workflow is like, with all the new technological advances in AI. You want to make sure that the architect is using tools that is going to add the most value for your project.
Yeah, and it's it's funny you say that, because it's the exact same process when myself or Colin or anyone on the team gets called in for a listing presentation. Someone wants to sell their home, condo, townhome, things like that. What it ultimately comes down to is, track record.
Mm-hmm.
Have you sold similar product to this and well? And then do you get along with the person?
Mm-hmm. Or if it's I have a client questionnaire that I give out to potential clients to try and help vet out, get some information for them to understand how they would be to work with. So it's like a two-way street. I'm there to solve a problem and to provide a service that's going to solve their problem of wanting to build something.
Yeah, for sure.
To solve a problem or to solve a need or a problem or desire in their life. Or at the same time, like, I'm running a business, I'm running a practice. I want to work with people who want to work with me. There's lots of services out there you can go and hire that'll draft a house for you if you have a desire for it.
Right.
And you'll pay a fraction of the price you would pay hiring an architect. But life is short.
Yeah.
You want to work with people that appreciate you and that value you and want to work with you.
Yeah.
Those are the projects that I'll give the most I can to those clients. That's what it really comes down to me.
Totally switching gears here. Talking about residential side.
Mm-hmm.
So paint a picture here for you. I'm running an open house and it's a 4,000 square foot house and it's built in 1965. And in 1965, we saw a lot of galley kitchens and compartmentalized rooms and things like that, right? My thought has always been, you can solve just about any problem in a house with money.
Yeah,
which is true.
It's true.
But can you also solve a lot of problems with structural beams? And when can you, because if someone wants to blow out a wall and wants this blown out over here and things like that, because I just kind of go, just defer to an architect or general contractor, but can you solve a lot with architectural beams in that renovation process?
I mean, short answer is yes, if you desire an open plan.
Yeah.
Like, if you desire more open space and more interconnected rooms, then you can. It just depends. Obviously, every house is different.
Yeah.
But there is a bit of a trend more recently to sort of get a little bit away from the full open plan.
Yeah, that's what I was just.
You know what I mean?
That was going to be my next question for you. Yeah.
There's a bit of a trend, you're seeing more where, for instance, maybe the dining and the kitchen will be in one space, and the living room maybe just tucked around the corner, or there's like a half wall or something, just demising it a little bit to break up the space a little bit more.
Speaking more personally, so as I know, you got a great wife, Teddy, and you guys have 2 young kids. You've been in your house now for how many years?
It'll be 6 years in May.
Yeah. And what drew you to that house was primarily the architecture of it, the neighborhood, things like that you wanted. You're like, hey, we can raise kids here, which is great. But you did do a pretty drastic renovation on the house. And it's always good to get an industry professional's, take, vision, opinion on how the process went. And maybe also something you would have done differently with your own home, being an industry professional.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll start off. My wife was a big fan of North Vancouver before we moved here. I grew up in sort of South Vancouver, and the North Shore was always like this enigma to me.
Yeah, we hear it all the time.
And it was like, it took me a while to come around, but when we looked at the house, when I found the house online, she was out of town. I sent her the listing. I said, Teddy, I think we should go look at this house. And she didn't, honestly, to her credit, she didn't even give a shit.
Really?
She didn't care what it looked like. She didn't know where it was. She just, if there's something I was interested in being in North Vancouver, she was game.
North Vancouver dress,
Yeah.
Start the car.
She's like, okay, go. So I went the next day by myself with our realtor at the time.
Yeah.
And I went through it. I looked at it. And I fortunately, I have, experience in, residential construction design to like see the potential and the vision of what it could be. And I called her after. I said, I think we should make an offer. She hadn't even seen it. We made an offer. She never even saw the property.
No shit. Oh, okay. No. I didn't know that.
It was amazing. It was, we put that as a condition. We put that as a condition, I believe, on our agreement that she had to see it first before we.
Yeah, we've seen that before on some deals.
I'm pretty sure we did that.
One side of the couple's out of town or something like that.
Yeah.
And yeah.
But this was like, it was awesome. She gave me the responsible freedom to do it.
So there you go. So you guys got the house, obviously, and then wanted to do this renovation. And what was that process like?
Yeah. So the process was, it's hard when you design for yourself.
Yeah.
It is hard when you design for yourself. She was great. My wife, Teddy, was great. She gave me basically 2 constraints. She said, I want a steam shower. And she said, I want a vanity. She said, I want a vanity area where I can sit in our bathroom.
Really? Those are kind of more old school style, right? Like
the only two things she gave me.
Okay.
Which was awesome. But it was also hard because now I had the pressure to deliver on everything else. And it started off as like a kitchen and bathroom, just a cosmetic reno. And we worked with Tate Matkaluk at Matkaluk Construction. He was great. And as we started opening things up after we got our permit, the thing had asbestos everywhere.
Right.
A lot of the walls didn't have insulation, so it's like, well, what do we do? Like we went over our budget, but at the same time we had, like, knowing what I know, you had to do it in the right way in order to actually, make your dollar go the furthest it can. So we ended up replacing all the electrical. We did like all the plumbing. I shouldn't say electrical. We did like 95% of the electrical. And we did like 95% of the drywall and insulation everywhere. So it ballooned. We spent, 20% more than we wanted to. But ultimately, we have a place that's essentially new, except for the framing.
Yeah.
And, we moved a few walls here and there, luckily the house had a pretty good layout. So that when I talk about good bones, like it had pretty good bones. We didn't have to move too many walls. But what I would change potentially would be not doing a renovation, maybe adjusting the scope of work for areas. Like, for instance, we have our living space is quite open. And when you come in the front door, there's a little tucked away area that we've since put in some built-ins as like a semi mudroom, which we didn't put in at the beginning because I was like, well, how are we going to use this space? Things that I would change would be probably having more of my wife's design input from the onset.
Yeah. Well, this has been absolutely outstanding. informational and just fantastic. For people who want to reach out to you for all things architecture, all things Polyform Architecture, where can people get a hold of you? Where can they find you? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, Polyform Architecture. I have a website, polyformarchitecture.ca. You can find my contact information there. You can see the projects that I've worked on. And if you want to give a follow, you'll kind of keep up with it, maybe not day to day because I'm not posting every day, but
okay, awesome.
Regular schedule programming.
Awesome. Well, Ben, this has been fantastic. Like I say, appreciate you coming on. And for those of you listening, by all means, give us a follow, give us a review. And thanks for listening. And we will see you next time.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Scott. It's been great.
Anytime.
Thanks for hanging out with us. And remember, in Vancouver real estate, nothing's off the table and everything's negotiable. Subscribe now to the Real Estate of Things wherever you get your podcasts.